so much for the introduction. I'm excited to be here today with everybody to talk about passwords and cybersecurity, because this is what I do for a living and I'm very passionate about it. So glad to have this opportunity. So a little bit about myself. I work as a senior security researcher and emerging threats lead for a top cybersecurity company here in the United States. I'm also in cybersecurity at a couple of different universities. And I am very passionate about supporting the community. So these days, I'm very engaged in various nonprofits that all have something to do with cybersecurity. Although in my past, I have worked for like other nonprofits in my previous career. So I totally respect how difficult this can be for many organizations. So the group that brought me here today is Women's Society of Cyberjitsu. I'm on the board of directors there, and we were actually using Charity How To as a customer. So that's how that all evolved. But as you can see on the screen, I'm involved with many different groups. And I have 4 degrees and like 15 industry certifications, something like that. So I know my stuff, and I really love sharing it too. So let's get into it. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is kick off with a check-in question. And what I want to see is if you have any idea about what percentage of breaches or hacks, whatever you want to call it, start with an attack on credentials. So in other words, the threat actors are using your login information that they've gotten somehow or the other, right? How many attacks do you think come from that? And we'll launch the poll if we haven't already. Or I can do it too.
Okay, I'm trying, but for some reason it's not working out there.
I think it's good now. So yeah, so just select one of those percentage ranges, and we'll give you all a quick sec to do that. Very curious to see what everybody thinks about this. All right, we're getting some feedback here. Looks like most people are guessing in the 61 to 80% range, which is very good because that's the right range. So let's go back to, yeah, here's the results. Yes, so 61 to 80%, you will see in a second, you're spot on. So let's get back to the deck here. And oops, let's see where my deck went. Hold on, here it comes. Okay, so yes, the answer is 61% of breaches start with leveraged credentials of somehow or the other. And really, it depends on whose statistics you look at. I have seen the numbers up as high as in the 80s percentage-wise, so that number can vary, but the point is it's a pretty high number. And one of the things that I think is really important for companies to understand is that your organization is a target. Like, never think that it's not. The threat actors who are doing cybercrime activity and that sort of thing do not really care necessarily what your business is. You are literally a target. And I've had many people say to me, well, why would anybody care about my data, or why would anybody care about what my nonprofit does or whatever? And they might not, right? But like it shows on the screen there, first of all, first and foremost threat for cybersecurity right now is ransomware attacks. And ransomware is basically when somebody hacks into your environment and they encrypt all your files, and then you have to pay a ransom to get access to your files back. These days, there's an additional wrinkle where not only do the threat actors encrypt all your files, but they also will steal information before they do that. And then they also hold that information hostage to increase the probability that you will pay the ransom. So it's not a good situation. It's so prevalent, and it just seems to get worse every day. And the threat actors don't care. Even nonprofits, they will go after. I've seen it time and time again. So also cryptocurrency mining. So if you're familiar with cryptocurrency like Bitcoin or whatever, you need a fair bit of processing power in order to be able to, do the mining. And I'm doing air quotes that you can't see around that, but it's processing power. So threat actors will also get into your environments and utilize your equipment to do this kind of processing. And so you might notice things like your system's running really slow or whatever. You don't know why. That can be what's happening in the background. It's really more of a nuisance thing, but if somebody can get into your network to do that kind of activity, it means that they can get in to do really anything. So that's a compelling reason to be aware of it. And then also just delivery of malware in general. There's so much malware floating around there, and malware just means malicious software, right? So I'm sure everybody is familiar with like phishing emails where you might click on a link and get some malware delivered to your computer, or you might visit a malicious, or it might just be an attachment. Actually, there's plenty of malicious attachments, things that or Word docs or Excel spreadsheets or PDF files, and you download them from the email, and presto manifesto, you've got an infection on your computer. So that's very common as well. And then people will also leverage your company website, and I see this so much, especially if you're running like WordPress, which is particularly vulnerable to exploits. But really, it doesn't matter. It could be any kind of platform that you're using. The threat actors will access your web account, excuse me, in order to do things like have your website be the website that's delivering these malicious links, or maybe is distributing a spam campaign behind like your mail server or something like that. So this is what I see time and time again. And we describe this as compromised websites. So as a threat researcher, when I'm looking at a website, I'm like, is this a malicious website? As in like the threat actor created it for the purpose of being malicious, or it's a compromised website, which means it's a legitimate website that the threat actor has gained access to and is using it to host, malicious files or whatever from basically the root directory of your web server. So that is something that is very, very common. Okay. So that's basically why we care about passwords, one of the several reasons. So what I'm going to cover today for the how-to piece of this is how to assess your organization's security posture with regard to passwords, how to implement best practices for password management, how to create a password policy, how to check for compromised email accounts, and how to explain to your stakeholders the importance of password management. And that one is probably the most tricky of all the things. So let's start with how to assess your organization's security posture around passwords. So the most important thing really in any kind of cybersecurity assessment is evaluating what your assets and resources are. And you might be familiar with like asset inventory from, sort of more of an accounting viewpoint, where you're saying, I have, this Windows server and it's worth $2,000, whatever. But we want to look at it from another perspective, which is basically who has access and how do they get into it, and that kind of thing. So these resources and assets can be any number of things, but website access to your website, also accounts that you have on different services, like your Amazon account, for example. Does everybody in your company share a password for that? Do you have two-factor, multi-factor authentication? Things like that is what I want to know about. Obviously, Office 365, Google Workspace are very big ones in most corporate environments. Access to servers and computers, remote access, especially with the pandemic, that's been a huge attack vector. Just threat actors, using credentials to get into like VPNs and things like that, which, you know, a couple of years ago, we might not have been that familiar with remote access, but with everybody more or less working from home these days, it's much more prevalent and much more exploited. And then just really anything that you have to log into would be something that I would consider a resource or an asset. So how to go about assessing your posture here is, the first thing is I want you to use either the asset inventory template that I provided or another one of your choosing. It's up to you. But you want to make a list of all your resources and include information on how those resources are accessed and who has access to them. And whoever has access to your resources are who I would consider to be your stakeholders, right? So stakeholders could be, you know, your staff, it could be your board of directors, it could be vendors, like maybe your IT support company. When you start thinking about it and looking at it, you will potentially be surprised like how many people have access. And all these people need to be engaged in the process of protecting your organization. So also another thing to check, and this is very common in many organizations, not just nonprofits by any stretch, is making sure that people don't keep access if they don't need it anymore. So like maybe you had somebody who left your board of directors, you know, as they cycle out or whatever, do they still have, you know, access to your Office 365 resources? This is something that you need to be fairly diligent on checking. So in your bonus materials that are in the link for the session today, you will find an asset inventory sheet that I dreamed up for you. And like I said, not an accounting one so much, although I suppose you could combine the two, but just a simple one here. It says, you know, the item number, which you can number however you want to, 1 to whatever, or any kind of naming or numbering convention, a description of that item. So like, you know, Windows Server 2012. Purpose and use, so maybe is that server, is it your web server? Is it your mail server? Is it your Active Directory server? Things like that. Hopefully it's not all of those things. It's good to split these things up a bit. Any kind of identifying information, you know, some organizations will use asset labels, tags, and that kind of thing, or you can just use a model number, and the manufacturer. And then this is an important part, like who is the asset owner? So in your organization, there should be somebody who is responsible for tracking this information. So this is where you would identify this person. And really it's going to be probably, you know, an executive director or, you know, IT support person, office manager type person, things like that. Whether or not you have multi-factor authentication enabled, and then access control check. Like periodically you should be going through and just seeing, you know, who has accounts on this, who's using the accounts, so on and so forth. And you can do this for cloud services as well, like say Google Workplace. I would include that in this inventory, even though, you know, it's not a computer that you have access to, but it is still software that you have access to, software as a service in the cloud. And then also just some thoughts around how to set up passwords well. So definitely length is a very important consideration. Length should be at least 8 characters. I really recommend more than that, like 12 at least. Complexity is sort of having a mix of uppercase, lowercase numbers. Actually, the government guidance now is going away from the use of special characters because it's harder for people to remember and doesn't really add that much to the security aspect of it. And then aging, like how often should you change your passwords? Because you should be changing your passwords on some kind of regular basis, whether that's yearly, at a minimum, or maybe every 6 months. I will say you don't want to do it too often because then your users will have password fatigue and will lose interest in trying to keep up with, you know, like good passwords or whatever. So I gave some examples here on the screen. And the ones that I have on there for weak passwords, these are actually used time and time again. And there's lists that various people compile each year of like the top worst passwords that are used. These are always on there. But some examples of strong passwords, sorry, somebody's ringing my doorbell. Like this top one, my son Tom was born in 1999. So this is a really good password. It's got a mix of uppercase, lowercase numbers, and it's very long. And it's actually pretty easy to remember. Like, you know your son's name, you know when he was born. So I do not have a son named Tom who was born in 1999, by the way, so this is not my password. The next one is a line from a poem, and the next one is a quote. So you can use something that resonates with you, that you can remember, and that really is the best way to go about it. You'll hear these called passphrases as well, but I mean, they're still just passwords. All right, so we also want to discourage the reuse of existing passwords and require users to come up with new passwords as old ones age out. So one of the things that we see a lot too is, you know, somebody would be like doing passwords like seasonal ones, like, you know, password summer 21, password fall 21. Threat actors are kind of onto all our little tricks about how we create passwords. So that kind of thing is not great. And then multi-factor authentication, which I've touched on once and I'm going to touch on again, but wherever you can implement that, do it. It will save you a lot of grief in the long run. And then requiring the use of a password manager. So that is another key thing. And then again, performing annual checks of compromised passwords. So if I have time at the end, I'll show this website, but there's a website, you can Google it, it's called How Secure is My Password, and you can put in your password and it will tell you whether it's a good password or a bad password or whatever. They swear they're not using these passwords for anything. I don't know if I believe them, maybe I do a variation of whatever password you normally use, but it's very eye-opening and you can have your users do this too. Okay, so multi-factor authentication. Number one recommendation in my organization, and we do tons of incident response engagements where basically we go in to help companies recover after they've been breached or hacked or whatever. And there's so many times that if multi-factor authentication had been set up, it would have stopped the threat actors from getting in. And the threat actors, or hackers you might call them, are very opportunistic. They're going to go for like the easiest target. So if they hit your network and there's multi-factor, they're just going to move on to the next one probably. And what I mean by multi-factor, then I have an example there. Excuse me. So there's three primary factors. It's what you know, such as a password, who you are, so biometrics, like if you use your fingerprint or the face thing on the iPhone, and what you have, like a token, which in most cases is a smartphone. So what you see there is a screenshot from my phone of Amazon sending me my one-time password. And do not share it with anybody. I am sharing it with you, but it's no longer good because they also have an element of timing. So that code is only going to be good for a certain amount of time. It really is not hard at all once you get used to it. So I cannot recommend it enough. And there's many different software applications out there that you can use, like Microsoft Authenticator, Google Authenticator, Duo. I actually use all of these. They're all on my phone. All right. So password managers, this is an absolute must as well. Storing passwords on paper is no bueno. Storing passwords or sending passwords back and forth by email or chat or whatever is also terrible. Even storing passwords in the browser, when like a browser like Chrome or something is like, do you want to save this password? That's not great either because threat actors have figured out how to access those. So if somebody gets into your environment and knows your credentials, they're going to be able to access those passwords too. So definitely go with a standalone password manager. And there's a link there to a Wired magazine article that talks about the best password managers. So I would recommend checking that out or some other, reliable source to get some ideas of which password managers you could use. And then how to create a password policy. I've provided a template for you. You can customize it for your own organization, and it is a living document that's going to, evolve as things change in your organization. But definitely, at a minimum, you're going to include the rules around passwords, so that length, complexity, aging, reuse, all those things I talked about before, so on and so forth. And this is just a little screenshot of the sample password policy. And then how to check for compromised passwords. So this is another one I'll show you if I have some time at the end, but half an hour is such a short time. I could talk to you for hours and hours about passwords, not to mention all the other cybersecurity things. But there's a service called haveibeenpwned.com, and you can put your email or phone number in there. The phone number thing is a little newer, and it will tell you if you've been in any kind of like breach. So say, for example, like LinkedIn got hacked a few years ago and user credentials were stolen. All those credentials are out there in the world, being sold and reused and whatnot. So if you use those credentials for LinkedIn and you maybe also use them for your, I don't know, VPN access or whatever, threat actors know this, and they will do something called credential stuffing, where they'll use existing credentials that they've gotten from whatever source and try them against other resources. A very common activity. You can also subscribe to monitoring. A lot of credit cards and banks will offer sort of like dark web monitoring, which will let you know if your email address has popped up in any kind of breach. And same thing with password managers. Any decent password manager will alert you, say it'll be like, Marcel, your email address popped up in, the latest XYZ breach. You should probably consider changing your credentials. So this is a really important thing to do on some kind of regular basis. All right, explaining to your stakeholders the importance. So using the different resources that I've provided here, I would recommend creating like a short presentation or maybe even a video or something where you can explain the importance of protecting passwords as a means to protecting your organization. I'll say this now, it's the last thing, but you're potentially going to get pushback, right? Nobody wants to do anything that's harder than what they're already doing, but the difficulty compared to the security and safety that you'll get, it's just, there's no comparison. And if you have a password policy, everybody should have to follow that. And one way that I've found people to get engaged is have them do this in their personal lives too. I actually teach a lot of kids and like different workshops and stuff about this, and I always tell them to tell their parents to do like that Have I Been Pwned site, to check their emails, and everybody's always super surprised by the results on that. So that was a super, super fast breeze through of password protection. So I think that we have a few questions, and how much time do I have for questions? Is it like 2 minutes? That's what I'm thinking.
Well, 3 minutes for the end of the webinar, but if you need more time, it's okay.
Oh, okay, perfect. In that case, I'm going to show you some of these other sites. So let me stop this for a second. So how secure is my password? So let's say, for example, let's use the word password. And you can see there, it says your password would be cracked instantly. So the red is not good. If I add a 1, 2, 3 at the end of it, it would take a computer about a month to crack your password. Now keep in mind, when somebody's trying to crack a password, they're not using a computer. They're using something that's called a cracking rig, right? So there's going to be a lot more processing power involved. But I'm going to put in, let's see, usually this is where I would have people just give me examples of passwords to try, but I'll just make up something. Let's try the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. So that would take 600 nonillion, I don't even know that word, it's some kind of math term or numeric term, years. And, you know, I didn't use any special characters, I didn't do upper, lower numbers or anything, but it's very long. And this works because a lot of tools are just doing this by brute forcing character by character by character. So you think about the possibilities for a character. You've got, the 26 letters of the alphabet, uppercase, lowercase, that's 52, plus the digits 0 through 9, that's 62, plus maybe like 10 special characters that people use, that's 72. So, from a mathematical perspective, if you only have to try 72 things for each character in a password, if your password's short, that just makes it so much easier. If it's long like this, it's going to take much longer. All right, let's see. That was the Wired article. Password policy I already showed you. Have I been pwned? All right, so I'm going to put in here an email address of mine. It's like my old Gmail address that I've had for forever. And I'm just going to click on this button. And it'll tell me that, yes, this email address has been found in a variety of different breaches, right? So you can scroll down and see there was one involved with Dropbox, Evite, LinkedIn, the one that I mentioned before, MyFitnessPal. So a lot of times you don't even know that you've been in these breaches, right? It's just not apparent to you. Companies are supposed to notify, but that doesn't necessarily always happen. Okay, so I think now is probably the time for me to go into questions and let me know, do I need to stop anything, or if you got it from your end?
I will close the webinar, but you can go ahead and answer the questions.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so let's see. What kind of credentials are we talking about? Hopefully I've answered that one by now, Jody, because I covered kind of all the different possible resources. Leverage credentials, yeah, that's just where the threat actors are using logging credentials against your systems. Password manager that I recommend, there's LastPass, there's OnePass, KeyPass. There's a number of different good ones out there. If you hit that Wired article, you'll see, I forget how many they have in there, but there's quite a few listed. Oh, thank you, Sarah. And yeah, I think that's about it. Does anybody have any final questions before we wrap it up?
No.
All right.
Okay, then, once you log out, you will receive a survey on the presentation. As this is the first time we are doing this webinar, we would really appreciate it if you could complete it and provide your thoughts on today's webinar. And well, that's it. Thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Bye, all.